Hi, and welcome back to the wonderful world of the scientific hypothesis. My name is Brad Alger. In previous videos, we've seen how working with a hypothesis can reduce the effects of certain kinds of cognitive bias that would otherwise undermine the validity of scientific thinking and reasoning. But besides counteracting these bad effects, the hypothesis has several beneficial effects of its own. Science can be highly complex. Scientists are constantly bombarded with new information coming from their own observations and experiments, as well as a steady barrage of reports and publications from their colleagues. It can all be pretty overwhelming at times. Today, we'll look into a few of the ways in which the framework of the hypothesis can restore order to our own thoughts, organize scientific research, and enhance the clarity of our communications.
So let's see how the hypothesis can help create some order in this messy business of science. First, we'll see that it helps organize thinking. It guides research. It serves as a template which helps us plan our work and interpret the results. And finally, the clarity it provides can help us improve communications. I like the idea of bringing order to your thoughts as combing your brain, an image I stole from the American writer Norman Mailer. The hypothesis helps by disentangling and organizing our thoughts, which can otherwise seem knotted together and confusing. The hypothesis does this in several ways, a major one being the creation of a narrative, which puts the pieces of information together as a coherent whole, and this aids in our reasoning about them as well as our memory for them. He who refuses to accept hypothesis as a guide is resigned to accept chance as a master. This is a quote given by Santiago Ramon y Cajal. He points to the two different ways of going about investigation. We can either essentially toss a coin, in other words, take a chance and see which way our thoughts lead us or the data happen to go, or we can be guided by a coherent hypothesis that is very useful in going about an investigation. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with engaging in discovery or following your own curiosity or wondering what would happen. In other words, with letting chance be the master. And everyone does that from time to time. It's a perfectly valid way of going about an inquiry initially. But after the questions, the curiosity, and the discovery science have provided a lot of information, when you want to explain something, you need a hypothesis. Now, we know that our minds are always actively transforming data into hypotheses. We gather information, we answer questions, we satisfy our curiosity, and so on. And our minds automatically put these things together and produce hypotheses as we seek to understand the world. But notice that a lot of these hypotheses will remain in an implicit form, and therefore not quite as useful as they could be if we make them explicit. To take full advantage of the hypothesis in organizing our work, we realize that a hypothesis is essentially a blueprint for an investigation. It provides an overall plan. It also specifies the materials that we need and the steps we'll have to take. It tells us how the parts fit together and gives us a sense of the big picture. It's very explicit in its details. It's very well laid out in a way that other, more general kinds of investigation are not. And it specifies the sorts of things that we should look for. However, notice that the blueprint is not something rigidly engraved in granite, but a plan that can be modified as the circumstances and our needs change. And after the work is done, the hypothesis is also helpful for interpreting the results. As the scientist Poincaré pointed out, an accumulation of facts is no more a science than a heap of stones is a house. And so once we've gathered all our facts, we need to put them together in some orderly way. We need to say what structure they might form. And the hypothesis orders facts and puts them in a context so that they're interpretable and useful. And this, of course, is key because if we remember, the first goal of science is to understand nature. Therefore, we want to be able to organize our information. And working with a hypothesis provides several unique features. Most importantly, it separates true from false. We want true knowledge. And when we test hypotheses, we sort them into not false, which we've called corroborated, or what we accept as a current truth, and false. In so doing, the hypothesis also makes clear what it does and doesn't say. It specifies the limits of our knowledge and also explains how it can be tested in the future. And notice that this useful organizational structure is unique to the hypothesis. Other modes of doing science simply don't do that. When we satisfy our curiosity, answer questions, and so on, we don't get all these other benefits that the hypothesis provides. And finally, of course, we have to remember that the second major goal of science is to share the knowledge that we've gained. Information that we keep locked up in our heads is of no value to the society at large or the future of science. So we have to communicate it. And the hypothesis, again, is an ideal way to organize our communications to maximize the information transfer and their clarity. An investigation based on a hypothesis virtually writes itself when it comes to communicating the information in written form. It begins with a statement of what we knew, and then progresses to a statement of what we think is going on, which amounts to our hypothesis or hypotheses. From then, it follows naturally what the predictions were and what tests we did and how the results relate to the tests. We end with a discussion of what we now think is the case, that is the new hypothesis. And finally, it expresses in a general way what comes next. And this clarity of organization that is provided by the hypothesis may be especially important now given the global reach of science, in which scientists from all over the world have to be able to read and interpret and understand each other's communications. Investigations based on the hypothesis and laid out in a reasonable, orderly way are much easier to interpret by scientists everywhere than figuring out the details of a story which lacks the inherent clarity and order that's provided by the hypothesis. The organizational structure that the hypothesis makes available is invaluable at all levels of science.
Thanks for watching. Remember to give it a thumbs up if you like it and subscribe to hear more. See you next time.